Hello, Garland Nixon here, and Ukraine offensive. If it's going to happen, whatever it's going to be, I don't know. Very interesting stuff. Let's talk about what it all means. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and as Scott Ritter always says, when you call Scott Ritter, he says, "Hello." So, hello, what's happening? Um, Friday morning, and we've been talking for weeks now. Well, at least it's this week, but probably 2 weeks about this counteroffensive from the perspective that when's it going to start? It's starting any day. It's going to start today. It's going to start tomorrow. How many times have we heard it's already going to start? It's already started. It's going to start. It's when's it going? We went from when is it going to start to it's going to start any minute to it's already started to Zelensky saying and some of the Ukrainians saying, well, we need a few more things. Can we possibly put it off? Maybe we're not ready to start. So on a day-to-day basis, we live in kind of this Schrodinger's cat kind of offensive where it has started in one particular from one perspective it has started, from another perspective it hasn't started, from another perspective it's never going to start. They need more. So I guess we need to as they would say in quantum physics, we need to open the box and look at these waves to see what's collapsed in the Ukrainian offensive. And what's collapsed? NATO. That's what's collapsed in the Ukrainian offensive. This is the curtain call for NATO. What we're looking at now is just prior to. Now I'm gonna give you my speculation. I like to label it speculation, because I don't want to pretend. I don't want to call it. I'm not a military expert. I'm not an. There's some things I'm an expert in the law enforcement realms. Yes, there are some things that I could be considered that I've been considered a court expert, but this ain't it. So this is pure speculation from a guy who ain't a master of this stuff. So take it with a grain of salt. I think based on everything we heard that there was definitely a plan for an offensive. Now, for all I know, again, not for all I know, let me say this. The odds are that by the time I get this video, there will be reports of no offensive is going to happen. There will be reports of the offensive has already started. There will be reports of they don't have enough. There will be every report. So now it doesn't matter anymore. It's just constant reports of, the offensive, something about it. I guess if you're going to report anything, it's over. It's been lost. It's been won, whatever, right? I think a couple of things, my thoughts on the offensive. Number one, the preposterous concept of telegraphing your offensive. We're going to have an offensive and telling your adversary when. In what war in history has that ever happened? In what war in history has the one side like sent, I don't know, World War I carrier pigeons or something over to the other side? Hey guys, we're coming over the trenches somewhere around the middle of March, and be prepared. Set some machine guns up so you can mow us down. Maybe some tank traps, mines would be nice, what have you. But we just wanted to let you know, wouldn't want the element of surprise. Certainly not interested in the element of surprise. We got to tell you, this is when we're coming. And one of the reasons why that happened is because for the U.S. empire, NATO does not exist. It's just a U.S. puppet organization because they don't own those soldiers. They're not their people. Unfortunately for Ukraine, and this is going to be an important part of this discussion. Unfortunately for Ukraine, they are a puppet state, a proxy army. They are cannon fodder. What that means is that their masters in the West don't have to. They don't have to worry about pushback from home. They don't have to worry about body bags coming home. The U.S. doesn't have to say, man, we got 100,000 body bags coming home. with soldiers in them, because they know that that would fall apart. And all of the countries in Europe know that if they were to, be involved in a war with Russia, they would be bringing home body bags that their people, who would be the body bag people, it'd be them and their family, wouldn't be thrilled about it. Unfortunately for you, Ukraine, you're a proxy army, so they can have all the body bags they want, and they don't have to deal with the pushback from their government. That's right. You, unfortunately, are the bodies of the Ukrainians are irrelevant to their puppet masters in the West. So, what do they care if they telegraph their next move? They don't really. It ain't their people. They got no political pushback coming. They're not losing anybody. It doesn't matter if every one of you guys die. That's the problem for Ukraine with this offensive. That's why you would ask yourself, do you think if it was France or the UK or the US that they call and do that call ahead? Hey, guys. Hey, enemy. Yeah. We're going to attack you next Tuesday. Have a nice day. Boom. You think they do that? No, hell no, they wouldn't. They couldn't do it. They couldn't get away with it. The country would fall apart. The people would riot. If some country, any of the countries were at a in some kind of a military standoff, and they were to call the enemy and tell them exactly when they were going to attack, they couldn't get away with it. The people would go crazy because they know, oh my God, the enemy's just going to load up, and then as soon as our guys go in, they're going to throw everything they got at them. But what do they care with the Ukrainians? So what? That's what the Ukrainians are there for. That's why they call them cannon fodder, right? So, because of this irresponsible move of telegraphing to the Russians what their plan was, they are set up to, they're set up to attack supposedly at some point, and the Russians are set up to defend at the same point, and that would certainly not work out well for those who were on the attack. They'd be going right into the teeth of a prepared defense that has more soldiers, that has more stuff. Meanwhile, you got a hodgepodge of weapons. I mean, it's bad enough. I mean, talk about a setup, right, for the Ukrainians. Number one, you've been telegraphing what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. Well, that's just suicide. Suicide for Ukrainians to run into that, right? But number two, when it comes to weapons, you get them literally hundreds of different kinds of weapons. So let's say the Ukrainians, I know there's several tanks that Challengers and Leopards and blah, 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 several different tanks that use 105 millimeter shells, right? But they're 105 millimeter in size, but they're different kinds of shells, so they won't work in these, say, 3 or 4 different tanks, right? So here's the thing. So meanwhile, they're fighting on the front, and trucks are coming in to resupply them with 105 millimeter shells, right? Hey, here's your 105 millimeter shells. Will they work in my tank? I'm not sure. Try them. Oh, darn, they don't work. The contact line's 1,000 miles wide. But even if you're fighting in one area, let's say it's 50 or 100 miles in size, right? There's tanks all over the place. You got 105 millimeter shells in trucks to resupply the tanks, and you don't know which tanks they take. You give them to the wrong one, and then they don't work. So you have horrific problems of resupply and rearmament and maintaining supply and maintaining armament when you have various and different shells, various and different standards for different things. Now, add that to, you've given some of these people weeks or maybe a few months of training, right? Let me tell you something. When it comes, let's compare a tank to a hovercraft. I used to pilot a hovercraft. Let me show you. I'll show you, and I'm going to make sense here. Let's see if I can find a picture of the hovercraft, and I'm going to tell you why this is of value. All righty. Let me find what it looks like. The particular one. Here we go. Okay, this will work. So I'm going to show you this little critter right here, and bear with me. I'm going to make sense. Maybe. All right. That, my dear and fluffy friends, is a hovercraft. It's a Slingsby Aviation SAH which stands for Slingsby Aviation Hovercraft. SAH 2200, right? That's it. That's a Slingsby Aviation. And you'll notice it's going along over the ice. You will notice that hovercrafts are fully amphibious. They can go over land, they can go over ice, they can go whatever, right? But trust me, you can 360 this thing. It's very, very difficult to run a hovercraft. Not an easy thing to pilot. That's what they call a hovercraft pilot, a hovercraft operator, a pilot, right? So here's my point. If someone were to say to me, okay, Garland, we're going to use hovercrafts to attack the Russians in Ukraine. So, okay, not a good idea, but tell me about it. We need you to train some hovercraft pilots. And we're giving you 2 months, 3 months. And you're going to train them for assaults, military assaults. Here's what I'd say. You got to be out of your mind. Forget military assaults. If you give me 2 or 3 months to train them, the best I can train them to do is kill themselves. I can train them pretty well to do that. I can train them to slam that damn hovercraft into a who God only knows what. I can train them to flip it over on the ice and smush themselves to death, to maybe slam into the side of a ship and blow themselves up. I can train them to do all the kind of things that would cost them their lives and give and create an environment for the untimely demise of the operators. That I can do in 3 months. No problem. If you want them to blow themselves up, kill themselves, slam into something, that I can train them to do. But to actually train them in, say, 2 or 3 months, now forget it. And to operate in a hostile environment, what happens when bullets start flying? You know what happens when bullets start flying and people are trying to move? They just shove the gas to the floor. They're getting out of the way. You don't want to do that in hovercraft. You can on ice or whatever. You have water. You can go spin it out of control, and you're going to flip. All kind of terrible things are going to happen, right? So no, that ain't a good idea. So here's my point. It's it's like learning to run a tank or a plane or something, right? It's a difficult piece of equipment to learn. Very, very sensitive, has its idiosyncrasies. And if you do things wrong, you're gonna have a real bad turnout, okay, at a real high speed. Those things don't go together. So what's my point here? You got a whole lot of hovercrafts. You're teaching them to run various kinds of tanks. You're teaching them to run various kinds of electronic equipment, etc. They're even talking about planes. Oh yeah, we'll give them some F-16s. Why? We'll teach them to teach it. You'll give 3 months, 2 weeks. 2 weeks. You can't. 2 weeks. You can't take that thing off in two. You can't get off the ground in 2 weeks. You can't even learn, what the buttons are in the cockpit in 2 weeks, much less what they memorize what they do. Forget it. You're getting shot down. So what we're looking at is a circumstance where the West has decided, forget it. The U.S. empire has said, we're going to put lots of weapons in the hands of these people, all kinds of various weapons, and that is going to give them some kind of an advantage. Now, that's the cover story. That's what the news says. In reality, what's going on? In reality, all that's going on is the United States is poking around all over Europe saying, do you have anything? Anything. And they're like, we got an old cannon from like the War of 1812. Hey, that's good enough. Give it to them. That's basically the cover story for us, is that there are all of these extravagant weapons. There's all these high-tech new weapons, HIMARS, Storm Chaser, whatever, Storm Shadow missiles, and all such bullcrap as that, right? The cover story is we're giving them these great weapons, so fantastic that the Russians won't even have a chance against them. Here's my question. You guys planned this war. If they were if the Russians weren't going to have a chance against them, and you were giving them this great technology, and why didn't you give it to them in the first place? Well, how did they get to the point where they needed this stuff? How did they get to that point where they need all of this stuff? Because the old stuff got blown up, and you know it. You already gave them a lot of new stuff, and it's gone. And now you're scrapping around for anything you can for a counteroffensive, which, might I add, the word counteroffensive implies that the Russians are doing an offensive and you're counterattacking, right? Well, since the Russians aren't really doing offensive unless something's changed, then you ain't counterattacking, it's an offensive. But counteroffensive is simply part of the information war, because that implies that the Russians are the attackers and you're defending. That's what it is. So the reality is, we're just looking at, they're trying to put together, the U.S. empire is trying to put together enough weapons of any kind It's hilarious. I read things that said the Russians are out of weapons and they're using shovels, right? People project onto their other people what they're up to. Man, they're digging for everything. I'm not saying it's shovels that the Ukrainians are using. I'm just saying they're using whatever they can get their hands on. They're giving it to them and saying, "Here, use this." What kind of position is that in? That to be in to fight a modern military, to fight a modern combined arms military that has land, sea, air, and space assets. That's Russia. It has land, sea, space, and air assets, and an intelligence. Now, the Ukraine has very limited air assets, if any, land assets, virtually no sea assets, really not virtually no sea assets, and the space assets of NATO. But what does that combine with? What does that give you? To me, so far, it's given them the ability to do some what I would call pinprick strikes. Some drones hit here and a missile hits there, and you get a lot of news. Missile hit a fuel depot in Crimea, but did it affect the ability of the Russian military to continue on? Usually not. So where we are now is we're at this so-called, we don't know. The truth is this: we don't know. Day to day, it's the same stories. The offensive has started. The offensive hasn't started. There's a counteroffensive in Bakhmut. There is no counteroffensive in Bakhmut. The so-and-so has moved a kilometer this way. No, somebody else has moved a kilometer that way. So we're just kind of waiting, hanging on to see what's happening. And it appears to me, here's one thing I think happened with the counteroffensive or offensive, whatever the hell it is. I think one of the things we're looking at is and put the timing all together. It appears that the attack, the drones, that they call it an attack on the Kremlin. I call it an attempted attack on the Kremlin, I guess. I mean, you had a couple drones blow up and they like bent a flagpole or something and knocked some tiles off the Kremlin's roof. So I don't know how much of an attack that was, but maybe it was an attempted attack of some type. But shortly after that, within days after that, the Russians started massive strikes, massive long-range strikes from missiles, massive airstrikes. They hit a lot of stuff, right? And there were those who felt, well, that was retaliation for the infamous Kremlin thing. Possibly. I feel that one of the things that happened was, and I think that's one of the ways that got us where we are and why there's so much disarray in Ukraine and its patrons. I think the Ukrainians were setting up for some kind of some kind of offensive. They were setting things up. They were getting prepped, moving the things they needed to move in place to do what they wanted, were prepared. Excuse me. And I think the Russians, one of their game plans was, and I mean, think about this. It's like fighting, right? Somebody's going to punch you. Boom. Somebody's going to hit you. Are you going to stand there and wait for the punch to hit you? No. If you see somebody, there is a lot of people believe that there are those who believe that if you see that somebody's going to attack you, if you see that there's no way out of it, that you should reserve the right to strike first. The old put your hand out. Hey, I don't want any trouble. And you put your hand out. And if somebody comes within the striking distance of you, if they come within your reach, if you can see that they're hostile towards you, the person's got that look on their face. I'm going to get you. I'm going to do this. They're threatening you, whatever, right? Hey, man, I don't want no trouble. You put your hands out. You put your whatever, right? Or you create what you consider a mental perimeter. The person strikes in, comes inside that perimeter, they're too close. If they get inside that perimeter, if they've got a knife, they can knife you, they can hurt you, they can grab you, they can do things before you would have a chance to react. So there are those who believe if somebody comes within your perimeter, within the distance that they can strike you and hurt you before you could react, that your best bet is to take the initiative, as they say. Hey, I don't want any trouble. Now the person comes in, like this. You got your hands like this, right? I don't want any trouble. Well, one in front of the other. I don't want trouble. Now you've got the opportunity to do all kinds of things, right? You can grasp, you can strike, you can step back, you can block, you can do all kinds of things, but you're prepped. But the other belief is if they come inside that, you don't wait for them to strike first. I say all that to say this. Say all that to get this is where I'm getting with that. I think one of the things that has happened here is that the Ukrainians have set up their stuff to get ready, geared up, put the things they needed in place, start mustering the soldiers, excuse me, getting everything ready, right? We're going to bop these Russians. We're going to give them what for, why not do it again? And what the Russians did, I think, was wait for them to get everything in place. You know, they just kind of sat there. All right, what are you doing? I have heard that there were a number of S-300s, up to six. The S-300 is the probably the most advanced, the most effective anti-aircraft system that the Ukrainians have. It's an older, developed in the 1980s model, and originally a Soviet system. However, the S-300 has been upgraded to like the PMU, and then the S-400 is a newer version of the S-300. So there are newer versions of the S-300. It ain't one S-300. It's like saying I bought a Mustang. Well, the Mustang from 1967 is not the same as the Mustang from, 2000 and the electric Mustang from 2023. It's still a Mustang. So the S-300 that they have is not the same as the S-300, say PMU, that the Russians are still using, or the S-400, or whatever the case may be, right? Or any of the S-300s that they're going to have that were developed, 20 and 30 years later. But at any rate, it's still effective. It's still probably more effective than most anti-aircraft systems in the world. And they brought a number of them forward to help protect the troops. My understanding is they were blown up. I think the Russians, it appears, attacked the storage, fuel storage. They attacked the ammunition storage. They attacked troop concentrations. It appears, I could be wrong, I'm just saying based on what I've been researching, it appears that the Ukrainians mustered together the things that they were going to use to attack for their offensive, spring offensive, and that the Russians struck a number of those things so much. And I'm speculating, but this is what I think. I think they struck those things so much so that it weakened the Ukrainian military and made it difficult, if not impossible, to effect this offensive. I've read that Zelensky is now saying we need more time before we actually do the offensive. Again, don't forget, as I say this is speculation. It's possible that before I get finished this video that the Ukrainians have started some offensive. So don't think that I'm, General Schmo or anything. I'm just a guy with looking at what I see and trying to make some sense of it. So at any rate, so what we're looking at is, I think what was a planned offensive is probably a crippled offensive. So they had things they set in place. They were going to make their move. And now they're looking at an environment where, okay, we can do an offensive, but we've got 40% of the military potential that we had planned on for this offensive. And I think there's a push. There's something going on in Ukraine because there's missing generals that they can't find. Zelensky. There's rumors that he was killed or wounded in a missile strike. There's rumors that he's just hiding somewhere. There's no way of knowing. Could be either. Could be a little of both. He could be hiding and he could be injured also. But he's nowhere to be found. The other generals have kind of disappeared out of sight. They got some problems. There's problems there. And because the US empire has built up this offensive, and this is going to be the be all end all, and they're going to go, they started off with that. They're going to go all the way to Crimea. They're going to continue on to Moscow. The Azov battalion will be sitting in Red Square by June 1st. They built this thing up to a point where there's a level of expectation. An expectation A, that it's going to happen, and an expectation B, that it's going to have some level of success against the Russians. And here's my belief: because the Russians are in a war, because they're fighting two different kind of wars. The Russians are fighting a war of attrition. They're taking their time. They're fighting a war that they can't lose. They're taking their time. They're doing what I said all along. Not saying that I'm any military genius. Again, it's guessing. If you've been following my channel all the way back last fall, when people were saying the Russians were going to do this huge big arrow offensive, everybody called it. They're going to attack in December. They're going to attack this winter. They're going to attack. I said they may, but I wouldn't if I were the Russians. I wouldn't. Time's on my side. The longer this thing goes on, the more you get to crush you get to crush, wipe out, and destroy the military potential for Ukraine. So I have said all along, if I were Russians, I'd just keep pecking away. Boom, boom, boom. I just keep fighting, attack, 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 because I would feel like this. I can fight longer than you will, longer than you. And eventually your side will collapse. You won't lose, you'll collapse, which I mean is a different way of saying losing, but there's a different way of losing. One way of losing is we fight, I get in a punch, you get in a punch, boom, you hit me on the snoot, I'm out. Another way is we fight, 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 but you're in better physical condition. And after a while, I get tired and I can't throw any more punches. And I just collapse of a heart attack. Boom, and drop dead. You won the fight, but I collapsed. You outwitted me, right? I think that the Russians understand that they can fight. Here's the thing. The Russians understand that they can fight longer than the West. So if time is my asset, I'm going to use that asset. If I understand that if I go toe to toe with you, I may win, but there could be other problems. Versus if I go toe to toe with you, you're going to collapse and I'm going to weaken you in the long run and everybody around you. I think the Russians are going to drag this thing out. So I think they allowed the Ukrainians to, not allowed, but maybe even sat back and said, let's just wait and watch and let them collect all their stuff together. And the Ukrainians collected all of their stuff together. Mid-May is here. They're ready to make their move. They collect all their stuff together. I think they were held up a little bit by rainy, bad weather. And then once they got it all mustered and collected together, hey, look, what's the easiest thing to do? Let somebody bring all their equipment together and attack it all in one place. And there was massive, massive attacks by the Russians. I don't believe that these massive attacks were simply pushback, revenge over a couple of friggin' quadcopters or something blowing up next to the Kremlin flagpole. I don't think that's the case. I think it was let me just say this. Russia's not going to expend all of that military hardware. They're not going to expend all of those missiles and bombing raids and all of that just to get somebody back because they're angry and to quell public opinion. They did that for a reason, and that was to do one of the two things: either stop the Ukrainian offensive or dramatically weaken the Ukrainian offensive. So I think what we're seeing now is a time where the U.S. empire is scratching their head, because they're in a position where they've set everything up for this offensive and they said, okay, you got to do it. And the Ukrainian military has been significantly attacked and weakened. And now they've got to decide, do we just go ahead with a weakened offensive? Do we go ahead and say, now that they've knocked, 20, 30, 40% of our military potential out, we do it anyway, because it was suicide before. Now it's still suicide. I think there is a discussion inside of Ukraine about the wisdom of this, because, as I said, if you're the patron, what do you care? They ain't your people. It ain't your nothing. Who cares? You throw these people out there and they die. And I think that's what where the U.S. empire is. Who cares? We got some Ukrainians left. We got any left? Yeah, gather them up, throw them at the Russians. So I think there's a great discussion here. Meanwhile, I think in Europe, the Europeans are looking for a way. A lot of the European leaders are looking for a way out of this. And I don't mean out of just Ukraine. I mean, out of this trap that they've been set in, out of this prison that they've been put in by the U.S. empire. The world sees it. Everybody sees it. You and I see it. So they see it. If you're in prison, you know you're in prison. I'll put it like that. Nobody who's in prison has to guess, gee, I wonder where I am. If you're in prison, hey, there's bars and I can't get out. And there's a guy standing there saying, don't try to get out or I'll shoot you. So if we know that Europe is one big NATO prison, that it's not a defensive alliance, it's an offensive alliance, but it ain't a defensive or offensive alliance, because it ain't an alliance. It is a group of kidnapped prisoners being dragged around by a heavily armed, malicious, malevolent master, jailer. So I think that one of the things that's going on here, I truly believe this. I think the Europeans are all for this counteroffensive or offensive, let's call it, and they want this thing over. And I think they understand just as well as any reasonable military mind or non-military mind, such as mine, who looks at it, that the odds of the Ukrainians having any success whatsoever is minimal, and that the overwhelming odds is that there'll be a massacre. And I think to the Europeans that won out, that's an excuse, good excuse for them to say, well, hey, gave it a shot. Sorry about that, Ukraine. Ooh, that's going to leave a mark. Hey, guys, you know what? Maybe we can talk to the Russians and find a way out of this. I think that's what there's a powerful sentiment in Western Europe. Now, Eastern Europe, the leaders of Poland, Latvia, Slovakia, things like that, let's be honest about who they are. Let's not be mealy-mouthed about it. The leaders of these countries are the legacy governments of the Nazi collaborators. The Nazi collaborators in World War II, now their lineage has come down to these, the leaders of Poland and Latvia, whatever the hell, countries now saying if you speak, they're just like Ukraine. They're a bunch of damn Nazis. Hey, if you speak Russian, you're going to get thrown out. You must take a test now. I think it's at Latvia where they're saying Russian-speaking people have to take a test. If they don't speak Russian, if they can't speak Latvian or whatever the hell country it is, you get thrown out. Well, there ain't but a half a dozen people in these postage stamp-sized countries anyway, like the world really cares. These Baltic countries that have like roughly the same number of people as in the neighborhood that I live in. When we talk about some of these countries, Finland, right? I live in Maryland. Maryland's a fairly small state. Maryland's not a big state. Maryland's a pretty thickly populated state. It's a pretty wealthy state as such in the U.S. today. But here's the thing about it. It's got about 6 million people in the state of Maryland, which is more than the population of Finland, who has less than 6 million people. And the Baltic states have about 600 people. So, I'm being facetious, but you get my point. So we've got these little postage-sized stamp countries, and we've got a Poland that is run by absolute kooks, and the United States is aligning with these countries, these few little Eastern European countries. They're kooks. Now, why would you ask, would the United States align with kooks? Because the United States is run by kooks, and kooks align with kooks, with friggin' nutcases, with ideologues, and ideologues align with ideologues. So that makes sense. Meanwhile, I think the French and the German and these people are like, we need a way out. So I think they see the offensive as a way out. They want the offensive to happen. The offensive happen. It blows a flat tire, and it is really, really uglier. And for them, for France and Germany, let's face it, the uglier, the better. Sadly, if you're Ukrainian, this ain't going to work out well for you. I'm just saying, if you're Ukrainian, it ain't working out well for you at all. This is not going to be a good time to be a Ukrainian, especially a Ukrainian soldier, because your lifespan is going to be really, really short. So I think the France, Germany, and a bunch of Italy, other countries like that overall are looking at it saying, let's get this thing going, because next winter's coming and we need some Russian oil if we can get our hands on it, or fuel or gas, or we need to do something, because next winter ain't going to be pretty. So I think they're looking at it saying, how quickly can we get this over? And they're like, we got to have a spring offensive. And Zelensky, and if he's still alive, and these Zelensky and some of these people are, can you give us a little more time? They're like, no, we can't give you any more time. Go run in there now. They're like, well, we don't have anything. We'll be chewed up like cordwood. They're like, fair enough. Now, when can you start the offensive? And I think they want to get it out of the way for this reason. And there's reading. I've been reading this, preparing for the next offensive. Well, here's a question I have. If this offensive is going to be so effective, why do you need to pray? I've seen it in the news. We have to get weapons together and start preparing for the next offensive. But I thought this one was going to decapitate the Russians, cut their land bridge to whoever the hell where, to Crimea, march on Crimea. You're ready to overrun that. You're just straight on to Moscow. So we've heard of all the great success that this one's going to have. And what we're hearing now is, hey, what's going on with this offensive? That's not important now. What's important is that we start gearing up for the next offensive. You're going to have people to do that with. and you're running out of stuff. They're running out of hardware. And I think there are those who are happy about it. We're starting to hear a lot of rumblings in Western Europe that they have kind of had enough, and the pain is too great. The other part of it is, I think that we're looking at an environment where the separation of NATO is at hand. I think we're looking at an. Hold on one second here. I got a. I've got a uh, call. I have to send a message where I have to. Sorry about that. That was work related. The other thing I think you're looking at is that the fracture of NATO is going to be very much related to the offensive, this offensive, and the Ukrainians' ability to do it, to do it, because what we're looking at now is at the conclusion of this so-called offensive, if it ever happens, or if it doesn't happen, it's going to become apparent that there is no path to victory for the Ukrainians. Excuse me, for the U.S. empire. And I'm sorry about that. It's going to become apparent. I apologize. Getting a little distracted here, but you got to work, got to do your work stuff too. Bottom line is this, and so we can talk about the offensive, but let's just jump to here, whether it's the offensive that causes it or whatever the case may be. I think the offensive will create this dynamic. At some point, it becomes blatantly obvious, probably at the end of this offensive, or if it doesn't happen, that there is no path to victory for the Ukrainian military, right? That's the issue. To me, that's the issue here. If there's anything else that needs to be discussed, that's it. What happens when it becomes blatantly obvious that there is no path to victory for the Ukrainians? That's the big question, right? Isn't that the question? People who are afraid of nuclear war, people who are afraid of the U.S. or military or whoever, the Poles coming down into Western Europe, some alliance of NATO countries coming down, into Western Ukraine. All of that is about one question, and that is, we who have been following this know that there is no path to victory, and have known from the beginning that there is no path to victory for the Ukrainian military, puppet military. And the question is, what happens when that becomes glaringly obvious in a manner that its patrons can't deny it? What's the inside discussion that they have? What does the U.S. say? Well, when that happens, when it is exposed, when it's like, okay, the Ukrainians have to look at it and say, we tried our offensive, and I mean, the worst thing that could happen, let me say this, the worst thing that could happen at this point for the U.S. empire is for this offensive, because when this offensive happens, the Russians may, we don't know, they may just put the offensive down. They may put it down and counterattack. And that could be a time when the Ukrainian military faces, massive losses, and then they're put in a position of being, defending and running and retreating and things of that nature, to a point where their ability to defend falls apart. So I think the issue to me is not, let's say that they could fight for another year. Maybe, I don't know. Let's say they could fight for another 6 months. Maybe, I don't know. But if 1, 2, or 3 months from now, 1, 2, or 3 weeks from now, it becomes obvious that even if they fight for another year, that there is no path to victory, it becomes decision time. And even then, the longer that goes on, the better it is politically, the better it is militarily for the Russian side, because now you've got people fighting that don't feel that they can win. You've got their supporters. You've got the U.S. saying, hey, more this or that, more money, more whatever, more missiles. And you've got now Western European countries looking at it, knowing that they're throwing water, they're trying to save a burning house. get off. If you've ever done any boating, what you know is if you're on a boat, let's say you're on a boat and it starts catching fire, right? Grab your life preserver and get off it. You don't have time to stand around because like you got a boat, what it's loaded with gasoline. You got 100, 200, 300 gallons of gasoline on this boat and it catches on fire. Grab your life preserver and jump in the water as quick as you can. Get off there because that thing's going to blow. And if you sit around squirting a fire extinguisher, bad news, you're not going to get an opportunity. You're going to get blown so sky high. So when that fire starts, it's obvious there's no way out for here other than to preserve my life. I do believe that when it gets obvious that they're dealing with a boat fire here, that there's no way out, that they can just drag this thing out and they're going to lose. And now they're looking at longer term economic damage that the Western Europeans, as I never thought I'd see these words come out of my mouth, but I think you'll start seeing some pushback, more pushback than you have from the Western Europeans. You're already seeing some pushback when it comes to China. Mercedes-Benz, BMW, like 38 to 40% of their sales are in China. You've got a lot of Western European countries who need to access that Chinese market, and the U.S. idiot leaders are saying, hey, we need to cut you off from the Chinese market, just like we cut you off from the Russian market. And they're saying we can't do that. If we do that, we turn into the poorest region on earth. We become just an impoverished region of, people will be literally eating each other, because at that point, that's the only thing left to eat is each other. And they're not ready to go there. So I think that at the point where and that's it, there's a point here, at the point where it becomes undeniable that there is no road to success for Ukraine is where the rubber hits the road. Will there be, now certainly we already know that Eastern Europe, right? The Eastern Europeans will be like, we've got to get a coalition of the willing and go into Western Ukraine, right? And there's neocons here that'll say yes, but then there are also people here that'll say no. So there'll be pushback here. I think Western Europe pushes back on that. Germany don't want to do that. France don't want to do. These people do not want to go in, and they also know this: we go in, we get to fight with the Russians. We know how this ends. Our entire continent is going to be turned to rubble, maybe nuked, blown to smithereens. No thanks. We can't go that far. So the U.S. will maybe try to drag them a little further, but Western Europe ain't down with that. I also think, and I've said this on many occasions, when it comes to utilizing their full military potential, I think the Russians all along, people who have criticized them, they don't have enough troops, they don't have enough hardware, they don't have enough this, they don't have enough that. I do believe all along the Russians have taken a position. Let me put it like this. Garland Nixon's in charge of Russia. What position does he take? I say, look, I know we can beat the Ukrainians. We'll fight a long time. We'll drag this thing out. We'll create cauldrons and, whatever, right? But we're going to fight that one a long time. But if we have to go up against NATO, that's a real fight. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to use as little as we can get away with. We're going to burn as little men, materials, all of that, as little as we can possibly get away with fighting Ukraine. We got time for that. That way, we will have it in reserve in case we're attacked by NATO. We'll have our full military potential for defense. That's what I would do, wouldn't you? So we will have to suspect that what the Russians are doing is the wisest thing, and that is utilize as little military power as you can get away with to fight the Ukrainians. Even though your people are going to get upset, your supporters are going to say you're not doing enough. Why don't you crush them? Why don't you do this? You just say, yeah, that makes sense, and I agree with you, but if there's a potential for a far greater war, and if that potential comes to fruition, then if we've put out all of our effort fighting Ukraine, then we become weakened. See, they're looking at what's happening with NATO, and they're saying we don't want to make the mistake that NATO's making. Right? Look at what NATO's doing. They're throwing everything they got in Ukraine. Yes, but now certainly Russia, from my understanding of things, has no intent upon attacking Europe. But here's my point. Germany has come out and said we couldn't even defend ourselves. We're out of stuff. France, various countries have come out and said, even the UK, we just don't have the ability to defend ourselves with. We're so weakened by all of the stuff that we gave to Ukraine. We're out of ammo. France at one point said they had 2 days worth of If they got into a war, they have 2 days worth of artillery rounds. Okay, so you're looking at the Western Europe saying we're using everything up. If Russia were to attack us, they wouldn't have to attack. They just have to put their tanks in forward gear and head all the way to the English Channel because we don't have any much military to stop them. Right? There's nothing other than U.S. military power, which is predominantly air and naval power, which is very, very susceptible, of course, to anti-aircraft assets, and of course to ship to, ground to surface missiles that would attack um, their marine, the naval stuff. They just don't have the assets they need in Western Europe to protect themselves. So if the Russians wanted to attack, which, let me add this, the Russian military is not even designed for these long excursions out there. It's designed to work along its border in a defensive manner. But I'm just saying, if they wanted to, NATO has put themselves in a position where they cannot adequately defend Western Europe, which again tells you that they don't really believe that the Russians want to attack. They wouldn't give up all of their weapons if they were actually really afraid that the Russians were going to attack. But they know good and damn well that the Russians don't have any intention on attacking Western Europe. So therefore, they can give up all of their stuff. That's the giveaway. They're giving up all of their stuff. And they're literally coming out and saying, we don't have anything to defend us anymore. Well, if you thought Russia was going to attack you, you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't say that, because you'd say, well, my God, as soon as they know we're defenseless, they'll attack. But they won't. But here's my point. The Russians are looking at that saying, we ain't going to do that. What do you think we are, idiots? You think you're going to put all your stuff in Ukraine and therefore you're defenseless? We ain't putting all our stuff in Ukraine, so we're defenseless. We will put the minimal amount we can get away with. That's not saying the Russians aren't putting a lot of assets in Ukraine. I'm just saying the lot of assets likely means they're putting the minimum amount that they can get in there. So again, we get to a point where Europe and the U.S. empire has to wake up one day and deal with a reality that you and I already know. Ukraine can't win. Now, what do? They've been convincing their people that Ukraine's going to win. They've got nothing but newspapers all day long. The Russians are losing. The Russians are falling apart. The Russians' missiles are getting shot down. For every 100 missiles that the Russians launch, the Ukrainians shoot down 125. They've been BSing their people. And at some point, the rubber meets the road. And now it's, okay, what do we do? How do we deal with this? Now, if NATO had the military assets, I would have to suspect that they would consider, a clash with, the U.S. empire would consider a clash with the Russians. Damn sure tell you right now, the Europeans wouldn't, because they understand their continent has been blown to pieces before. They don't want to get it blown to pieces again. And of course, they know it would end with them all being a pile of nuclear ash. So that the Western Europeans ain't buying into that. And I think that the lunatics in the Pentagon, the lunatics in DC, you've got another group of them that want to pivot to China anyway. They're like, hey, yeah, you know what? This Russia stuff didn't work out like we wanted. It's no fun. We can't make the money we used to. The money's in China. Let's move on to China. Let's go try to surround and gripe and complain about China. Knowing also, if we're honest with that, if we look at the Chinese, at the dynamic, then the truth of the matter is the U.S. could not stop China from invading Taiwan if they want to. But what we have with China is a solution looking for a problem. We want to stop China from invading Taiwan, and China's like, we have no intentions of invading Taiwan. And so the U.S. has to create an environment to literally try to coax China into invading Taiwan so they can go to war with China or do something. They can at that point say, we're going to put sanctions on China all over the place, so they can just create a disastrous environment, and they can have some kind of a toe-to-toe clash with China, be it military, be it whatever the case may be. The rest of the world knows, man, this has been a disaster for us economically, and for you guys to go to war with China or to have a confrontation with China would mean starvation all over the world. That's really what it would mean. It would mean starvation. It would mean extreme impoverishment and starvation worldwide. And that's what the world has to wake up and realize that NATO is about. It's about creating a dynamic where the uh, the world's economy falls, crashes, and then there's starvation, and this would all be because the U.S. empire is falling, and they can't allow China. They don't want to allow China. They want to try to stop using that word. They want to try to stop China's economic rise, and that's already too late. But the bottom line is how that relates to the counteroffensive is, or the offensive is this, that when I talk about the offensive, it's all about one thing. It's all about getting to a point where this is what this whole discussion is about. Getting to a point which we are getting closer to, where it's no longer, you can no longer make an argument that Ukraine has a chance to win. Well, that's what it's all about. What happens when we get there? I think we've been discussing this thing for years, but it's all about at some point we reach that, and who's going to do what, right? Who's going to do what when that happens? And because of the time that we've gotten to, I think Western Europe gets out. And I also think this, at that point, the clash between the US and its colonies in Europe starts coming to a head, because certainly Australia, the U.S. is the preposterous relationship with Australia. Australia is their number one trading partner by a mile. The dominant economy in their region is China. And so Australia supposedly is getting submarines from the U.S. to help protect its trade routes from China. It's number one. In fact, in reality, what Australia would want to do is protect the Chinese trade routes to ensure that it could trade back and forth with China, not to protect its trade routes from China. You're buying stuff from China, China's buying stuff from you. Why do you need to protect yourself from these ships that that are buying stuff from you, or that you're buying stuff? These are materials that you've bought or sold, and you're gonna no. Everybody understands what's happening, and that is that Australia is being enlisted in the United States move to encircle China. This is what it's about. We're going to encircle China with bases and military and all kinds of stuff so we can threaten them. It's the same plan for Russia, right? Now it has failed with Russia. And I guess I guess that's the other part I'm talking about. At the point, I guess maybe that's why it's just coming to me. I guess maybe that's why that whole thing, why I'm focusing in on getting to the point where the US, where it's undeniable that Ukraine can't win this, right? Why that seems so important to me intellectually. The whole neocon project, right? This whole thing about the US being an empire is dominating the world militarily, dominating the world economically, dominating the world diplomatically. And when I say diplomatically, I mean the ability to use diplomatic coercion, not diplomacy in the traditional sense, where you work out your problems with your adversaries or friends. The project, remember, Russia's rising, we got to stop them. China's rising, we got to stop them, right? So the way they're stopping Russia is to weaponize Ukraine and to use Ukraine to weaken Russia. But Ukraine, when it's all said and done, that will have strengthened Russia. And it's like this. No country, according to the Wolfowitz doctrine, look it up, according to the foundation of what the U.S. empire is trying to do now with this neocon project, the foundation of that is no country is allowed to rise to the point where it is a competitive power economically, militarily, etc., in any region of the world. Not even a regional power. Can't happen, right? So you say, well, Russia has risen, we got to take them down. Remember, that was what you're taking down Venezuela, because they have the potential to be, they're independent. They have the potential to be a regional power because they have so much oil. Iran, independent. They have the potential to be a regional power. They got lots of natural resources that they can sell and make a lot of money. They've got to be taken down, right? Hadn't had much success with any of those, but they were able to somehow put a cap, hurt them economically and hold them back economically. You've gone after Russia now, encircled it with bases. That's move number one. Load up Ukraine as a weapon, move number two. Use that weapon to weaken Russia, the move number three. That has failed. So at the end of this, when it becomes obvious that this project against Russia is going to fail, what's the point of going after China? Your whole mission is gone. That is the point. Whenever it gets to a point where it's clear and obvious that the Ukrainian military can't win, it becomes clear and obvious that the Russian military will win. And that the Russians will be able that the Russians will have halted the neocon project at their doorstep. The neocon project will have come up to the Russians' doorstep and ran into a brick wall. Because if the neocon project doesn't weaken Russia, breaking Russia apart, tear Russia up, then the entire thing falls. All of it falls. How can you say we're going to take Russia down? Why? Because no country can rise up to be a competitor to us, right? We're going to take Russia down, then we're going to take China down. You try to take Russia down, no country can rise up enough to be a competitor, right? And that failed. Darn. Well, they're rise up and they're a competitor and they're still rising. Oh, well, we'll go over to China. What do you think you're going to do? We're going to go over to China and then we're going to stop them from rising. And then when we get finished with China, oh my, Russia's rising. We'll go back to Russia. We'll get back to them later. I mean, that must be the plan. The neocon project must be, we'll try to take out Russia. And if that doesn't work, we'll jump to China. And then when we get finished with China, then we'll go back to Russia and finish them off. But what if China doesn't work? Which it won't. Let's face it like this. It's a much wealthier country than Russia. It's wealthier than the United States. It has industrial capacity to unlimited missiles and things that can, so it has a tremendous military to defend itself. You're going to its border, which is even further away. The US, it's even further away. In Europe, you've got all of these European countries that you control. In the Pacific, what do you got? Japan, South Korea, the Philippines. That's pretty much what you got. You don't have all of these countries, and Taiwan's a little island. So what are you going to do? You're going to be able to go 7,000 miles from home and fight this battle against a much more powerful foe without Europe and without these other countries? Because they ain't on board. They've already made it clear they ain't on board with that. The neocon project dies. The neocon, and I don't mean when it dies, what I mean is this. I don't mean that the neocons are going to throw in the towel and give up. But I mean, in the same way that at some point it becomes obvious that Ukraine can't win the war, that is the point where it becomes obvious that the neocon project has failed and there is no path for victory. If there's no path for victory for the Ukrainian military, there's no path for victory for the neocon project, because the neocon project is about world domination and ensuring that no country can compete on a peer-to-peer level. At that point, Russia has competed on a peer-to-peer level and has won. And the United States has to do proxy stuff. They have to lie. They have to pretend we're not trying to do this. We're just doing this. They have to lie to their people. They have to lie to the people of Europe and say this is all about independence and sovereignty and protecting a country that's been invaded and blah, 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 blah. They got to lie. But at what point did they say, okay, the Ukrainians can't win, so that's okay, that's fine? We said it wasn't fine. That's game, set, and match to me. At that point, I would say this. At that point, what is the point of going after China? And I have to say that their allies are even going to look at them and say that. What is the point? And their so-called allies, their colonies, are going to say, look, man, this really hurt. This really hurt us. Politically, economically, this was really painful, man. I don't know how the hell we're going to get out of this one. And now you're asking us to go after our number one partner. I think even Western Europe is going to say no. I think NATO has built some kind of opened an office in Japan, Tokyo or whatever, right? Well, again, that ain't NATO. The US opened an office in Tokyo and called it NATO. And I think most of NATO is just looking for a way out. And this offensive gets us closer. This so-called offensive, or the lack thereof, either one proves it. If the offensive happens and it gets slapped down, then it becomes obvious there's no path for victory for the Ukrainians. If the offensive doesn't happen because it's been critically weakened by military strikes from Russia and they can't muster things together, then guess what? It's game, set, match. Then there's no way to move forward. But it becomes obvious at that point. Either way, it becomes obvious there's no path to victory. If they launch it and lose, no path to victory. If they can't launch it because they're too weak, no path to victory. So what happens next? They've been said there was going to be an offensive, and that's where the rubber meets the road. That's it's dangerous. Yes, it's dangerous, because whatever the U.S. is going to do, they're going to do. But I think it's equally dangerous for the U.S. empire, because at that point they have to either make some kind of admission, oh crap, we got to end this by on the and let's face it, if there's no path to victory, that means they've got to end it on Russian terms, and they ain't going to be nothing that the U.S. empire is going to like. As I've said before in a pro forma videos, the U.S. empire cannot negotiate an end on Russian terms. I mean, even if they wanted to, they don't have the ability to do that. Neocons can't do that. So the Russians, so even if that happens and the neocons say, okay, well, I guess we got to negotiate, they'll call the Russians and say, okay, Russians, here's what we're going to do. We decided we're going to negotiate for an end. All you have to do is everything we tell, give us Crimea back, give us everything we want, and throw in the towel, and then we'll allow you to walk away. Oh, by the way, you're going to have to pay reparations. Because they don't have the emotional, neocons or sociopaths do not have the emotional tools necessary to understand what the other side's thinking, and to even say, well, this is what they want, this is what we want. Not only that, they don't have the ability to understand that they are not in the driver's seat. So when they are in a losing situation, they're still going to try to pretend as though in a winning situation, and they're going to put forth terms that the Russians will quite literally laugh at and say, you guys can't, just go away. Go away. We're not talking to you. And the Russians will continue fighting, but the Ukrainians won't be able to fight because they won't have the stuff they need. Now, add this. Well, the West is going to come in with Poland and a coalition of the willing. With what? They've disarmed themselves. If they get into a fight, they have disarmed themselves. So even if they wanted to get in it, they have disarmed themselves. They don't have the things they need to fight if they wanted to fight. It'll be a short fight. You're out of weapons. So that's it. If you take anything from this, if you take anything from this video, I don't even know if it made any damn sense, but I was just running off the mouth. But if you take anything from this video, it's that one point. We are approaching the point. We are approaching the point where it becomes obvious there's no path to victory for the Ukrainians. That's where we're getting. And then the relationship between the U.S. and its vassals will come to a head, and the long-term outlook for the neocons and the neocon project will come to a head. If in fact if in fact there would be a negotiated end on the Russian side, it's a game, set, and match for the worldwide. The Africans are going to be cheering. They're going to be jumping up and screaming, "Hooray, hooray! U.S., you got your ass kicked." The Latin Americans are going to be cheering. They'll be running around with Russian flags. The Haitians, on and on. The Muslim world, they'll all be running around with Russian flags. It'll be like after a big boxing match, and the side on one of the fighters will be running around flying, flags with his name on it, and banners with his name on it. To the U.S., basically, there's no way to win. They're going to lose another war, and they're going to lose a proxy war to Russia. This is what's got to happen. And how that comes to a head, I don't know, but we're getting close to that point. That's, in a way, that's what I would consider the end of the war, in a way. When it becomes obvious to everybody that the U.S. proxies can't win, that's kind of the end of the war. That's it. That's it. The question then is, how do you end it? Not whether it's over. All right, thanks a lot. Let me take a look for super chats and things of that nature. It doesn't look like a lot of them, but that's okay. We got lots of people on here, and that's all that matters. Are there even super chats? They're kind of a weird blue today, really light blue. When are you going to start calling Putin a clown? Will it no longer be precautious when it's going to be afraid Putin is losing me now? Okay. Why would I call somebody a clown? And what difference does it make who I call a clown? Okay. Peskov said yesterday, we do not destroy cities. We do not destroy population. This is not what we do. Tell us how Russia going to ever win anything. So, and again, this is what happens. People get disheartened over the course of the war. But, it's like watching a football game. You watch a game and you look at it and your team seems to be down one or up one, and the emotions go up and the emotions go down and things of that nature. To me, I just look at it as the long term. I'm not about Putin or Peskov or what they said on a long term. If I look at this, you know what I see? I see that no path for victory for Ukraine. I never saw one from the beginning. Never saw a path for victory from Ukraine from the beginning. All right, let's keep going. Ooh, is this? They made the super chat so damn light colored you can't even see them anymore. I'm missing these things. I'm missing the super chats. I'm sorry if I miss your super chat. Here we go. They're so light colored now. We all love your analysis in the tattoo shop, though you can blow the minds of some clients. Keep it up, bro. Thanks a lot. Oh, Kevin's Ink's house. Yeah, I'd love to go there sometime, man. I'd love to come to the top. Next time I'm in Europe, I got to go to the tattoo shop. Zeluzny is playing hide and seek. If he's still alive, yeah, if he's still around, he is. He may be around. There are those who think he is just hiding. All right, let me keep looking. I'm sorry if I miss any super chats. I've said that a million times. Let's go here. Let's hope Erdogan stays and Turkey leaves NATO. Second largest military. Yes, it is the second largest military in NATO. That's going to be interesting at what happens in Turkey. And pay attention to Pakistan, too, with Imran Khan. Pakistan is getting rapidly destabilized by the U.S. empire, overthrowing the government. Basically, that's what they did. They overthrew the government with the very corrupt people in Pakistan. Let me look and see. I know I'm missing some more super chats. I know I'm missing. I have to apologize because here's what happened. They made the super chats like this light blue color and you just can't see them. So, okay, we're going to go to Rockfin. And there's a couple people on Rockfin. Scott Johnson, thank you. Odie Huffman, thank you. All right, guys and girls and everybody. Thanks a lot. I got to get ready to head to work. Don't forget, everyone, if you can, go to rockfin.com/Garland Nixon and become a member. It doesn't cost anything to become a member. And if they throw me off of YouTube, you can see me there. We've got patreon.com if you can afford to help the channel. Of course, buy me a coffee, PayPal. But a lot of people are using buy me a coffee now because you can do 5, 10, whatever. It's like each coffee's $5. You can do that to contribute, getting the funds together to turn this thing into this poor little bedroom into office, into a former bedroom, into an office, and now convert it into a studio. And that's going to happen. So I appreciate everyone who's contributing to that. Buymeacoffee.com. You can also do like Patreon now on Buy Me a Coffee, and you can become a monthly contributor. So anybody can do that. I appreciate it. And of course, my Cash App info is up there. Don't forget, on Rockfin, doesn't cost anything. However, if you want to be a sponsor for my channel on Rockfin, I would appreciate that. And on Rockfin, that's actually $14.99 a month to be a subscriber. And if you sign up for a year, then it is if you sign up for a year, they give you a couple months free. So it's like $12 and something a month. If you can afford to become a subscriber for Rockfin, I appreciate it. I do a weekly subscriber only show for my subscribers. So I would appreciate that. If you can afford it, if you can, I certainly understand. Just go become a member on Rockfin. And if they toss me from YouTube, then I'll be there. I'm working on some other things. But at any rate, so thanks a lot, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Peace. I'm out.